It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, by George, I think he's got it. Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. Well, we've got big news, big aviation news, and it ended well. I often have heard that any landing's a good landing, and this one worked out all right. But it's United Flight 328, this flight from Denver to Hawaii. Maybe you've seen it in the news, and I'm delighted to have back on podcast by George, Captain John Cox, and I hope you've caught him on our prior episodes. Captain Cox is a veteran major airline corporate and general aviation pilot. He's flown over 14,000 hours, over 10,000 hours in command of jet airliners. Additionally, he's flown as an instructor, a check pilot, and test pilot. In addition to his extensive involvement in global air safety, he's in media all over the world. You're going to see that. We're going to have an Associated Press article coming up where he's quoted. And he's now an executive with Safety Operating Systems and has a column each week in USA Today entitled Ask the Captain. Captain Cox, welcome back to a podcast by George.
George, it's good to be back. Good to see you.
Let's bring this article up here if I can get the technology to work. Okay, this is from Associated Press. Got a nice headline. I thought we were done. That's from one of the passengers. Parts fall from sky in plane scare. Dateline, Broomfield, Colorado. Now, that's got to be a small town. I've never heard of Broomfield. David Delacia was settling back into his airplane seat and starting to relax on his way to a long-awaited vacation. And I've taken a vacation in Hawaii, folks. Now, I came out of Chicago, but I've been on a flight there. A huge explosion and flash of light interrupted an in-flight announcement and put him in survival mode. The Boeing 777-200 headed from Denver to Honolulu on Saturday with 231 passengers. Man, that's a big plane. And 10 crew aboard suffered a catastrophic failure in its right engine, and flames erupted under the wing as the plane began to lose altitude. And as Delacia and his wife prepared for the worst, people in the Denver suburb resulted in horror as huge pieces of the engine casing and chunks of fiberglass rained down in a sports field and on streets and lawns, just missing one home, crushing a truck. Now, the explosion, visible from the ground, left a trail of black smoke in the sky. You can see the plane trailing smoke there. There's a video of it. There is part of the engine up against a house, it looks like, there in that suburb that they're talking about. Okay, so Captain Cox, my first question would be, actually, as they're getting ready to take this flight, and like I said, a lot of people have flown to Hawaii, for God's sake. These pilots are taking off from Denver on what's a routine flight. Now, that was my first question for you. This turned out to be anything but routine, but with all the hours that you have in the cockpit, are any of these flights from a pilot's perspective routine?
Absolutely. It's another day at work. It's you've done your pre-flight planning, you've checked the airplane, you've set it up. This is all part of a carefully crafted routine that pilots go through. You've briefed it, and the takeoff's normal and up till the point that they're climbing through about 13,000 feet, and then it's not normal anymore.
Well, and walk us through that. Now, like you say, everything's going along normally. Everything sounds and looks as it should, and, pointed towards Hawaii. And here we go. Well, what's next? What would the pilots have seen? What would they have heard? What happened? Well,
the very first thing, there was an explosion, and that is probably more of a compressor stall, which is, it sounds and it scares everybody, but it's really not that big of a problem for the engine. It'll settle back down. In this case, however, the cowling around the engine, you can think of it sort of like the hood of your car. It was damaged, and it actually began to come apart. And those are the parts and pieces that rained down on that town just west of Denver. So information they've gotten this morning is 2 of the blades in the fan section. One's missing, and one, the outer part of it is missing. And that could and would cause major damage to the engine. And I think it's going to be, at least in the near term, that's going to be where the investigation is focusing. as to those blades and why they failed. They're going to look at metal fatigue. This is a really rare kind of failure. It has happened before, but it is not something that happens very often. Jet engines, modern jet engines, they're very reliable. And to have this uncontained catastrophic type failure is a very small subset of that low number of engine failures. But they were, as expected, the cruise training kicked in, the engine design, the airplane design tolerated this catastrophic failure, and they landed safely. And so there's some things that went right in here too.
Well, folks, you want to get the bejabbers scared out of you. I want to see if I can bring this video up here very quickly. Now, this was a video that was taken by a passenger, somebody on the plane. And I think you can comment on this, Captain Cox, as you're looking at this. I don't know what you're seeing that anybody else would see, but obviously this doesn't look good. I guess my concern as a passenger would be, hell, that thing's going to fall off. How much of a problem would it be if it completely came apart from the airplane? And then the integrity of the wing, that would be my next concern, because if that wing gets seriously damaged or even begins to melt or something, I mean, they're going down. What are you looking at here?
Well, I mean, I'm seeing that the pylon, the device that holds the engine on to the wing, it's in good shape. It's not getting fire damage. So their valves that they can close that shut off the fuel, shut off hydraulics, shut off pneumatics, and shut off electricity. So they'll get that fire out. And when they landed, I think there was some residual heat in the engine that they got out. But otherwise, clearly the engine's been compromised. And once they get the fuel shut off to it, that fire should go out. If you notice also that the fire staying in a very controlled area, the airflow is keeping it away from the wing, keeping it away from the pylon. So I don't think that there was much of a danger of it coming off. One of the things that would have been very unnerving to the passengers is when you have a rotating disc like this that has parts that have come off, it's out of balance. So it causes the airplane to shake. And that shaking would go on all the way through the landing. And that would be very unnerving to the passengers, but the airplane's designed for it.
So I'm very interested in the pilot's reaction to this. Obviously, those guys did a great job. Everybody got on the ground. Everybody was safe. But panic is your worst enemy, obviously, and something big is happening. What are they seeing on their controls? Because they're not seeing what that passenger's seeing. What alarms are going off? They heard the explosion, like you mentioned, but then what do they see and what do they hear that tells them or gives any indication of what the problem is?
They measure the speed of rotation in the engine. It's one way that you determine thrust. That would have fallen off. The exhaust gas temperature would have changed. It may have gone up or it may have gone down. Depending with that fire being the way that it is, it probably spiked up. But they're going to know that there is something wrong with the engine. There are engine fire detector loops that are on the outside of the engine. Depending on when that cowling left and if it damaged those loops, they may or may not have gotten an engine fire indication. But when they hear that explosion and they feel that shaking, they're going to treat it as severe damage, engine severe damage. And the checklist that they would go to is an engine fire or severe damage checklist. And that begins the process of shutting the engine down. You take the thrust lever back to idle, the fuel shut off to off, and then the engine fire switch, you push that and that closes behind the engine, back at the wing spar. It closes the fuel valve. It shuts off all electrics from the generator and trips the generator so it's not producing any electricity. It shuts the pneumatic valves and it shuts the hydraulic valves. So it isolates that engine in the event of fire. And at that point, then you begin to do exactly what they did, advise air traffic you've had a problem and you want to return to land. And then the programming of the flight management computer takes a few minutes. And then the normal checklist, the approach checklist, the briefing for the runway, all of those things go on. It was about 23 minutes from the time that this happened until they touched down back in Denver.
So tell us what a PAN is, and tell us what a Mayday is, and was either one of these declared in this situation?
They did use the word Mayday, which is we have a major problem on board, and what that tells air traffic control is that move everybody away from them. That they basically own the sky at that point. Anything they want to do, any runway they want to land on, any altitude they want to fly, air traffic control moves everybody away from them and gives them the most help that they can. The Denver controllers were very good. Once they understood that they had a catastrophic problem, their comment was, "Okay, United, any runway, tell us what you want." So they opened up the entire airport for them, and that's the best help that they could be. The crew made a decision on which runway they wanted, and then they programmed it, set the airplane up, and successfully landed it.
That's chilling. And as you mentioned, they set the airplane up. Now, I've seen where that's called configuring the aircraft for landing. That engine, my God, looking at that and the wing, what special problems did they have configuring their aircraft for landing, if any?
With it being a single engine operation or one engine inoperative, there's a reduced flap setting that you use. So they would be going through and making sure that the fuel was balanced, that because you're only consuming fuel now on one side of the airplane. So you want to make sure the lateral balance is maintained. So there's a cross-feed valve you can use for that. And then once you start extending the slats and flaps, that they do move as you expect them to, that they have not been damaged. So you'd be really watching to make sure that you didn't have any damage. Are all three of your hydraulic systems maintaining pressure and quantity, so that does a landing gear come down as the way that it should? All of those things you're going to be looking at, and from what I understand, everything happened there normally, so they were able to make a relatively normal engine and operative landing. Other than the fact that with that shaking, they know that there's something quite wrong out on that right wing.
And this is when you really pay attention to checklists. And I'm not a pilot. It kind of reminds me of sports almost. But you have to think, I'm in an intense situation here. I'm excited. The adrenaline's flowing. I got to make sure that I don't overlook something here, getting prepared to land, that I don't forget something, that everything is configured properly. And then, of course, with this management system they have in cockpits now, you got to make sure that you're getting input from the co-pilot and the pilot, and that everybody's on the same page and you're set to come down.
You do, but this is something the pilots train for. So on a normal simulator check ride, which we do every 6 to 9 months, it's very common to have engines fail, to have them catch fire, to have hydraulic systems fail, all of these things. So this is, how to handle this. And this is a testament not only to the crew, but to the training that they had received from United, that everything went as smoothly as it did.
Well, again, I appreciate you coming on to walk us through this. I mean, it's, raises the hair on the back of my neck just to think about being on a flight like this. And it's a great thing that it turned out well for everyone. Now, you mentioned this is relatively unprecedented. It has happened before. You've got this new news about these blades that you talked about. Can you speculate a little bit? What do you think is going to become of this? What do you think they're going to find is the cause of it? And what, if anything else, can be done about it? Or is it simply, I think about, like, I go to cars all the time because that's what I'm familiar with. I mean, the car engines will blow up once in a while too. I mean, I don't know what can be done about that. It's extremely rare, but what's your kind of final analysis here?
Well, I think they're going to look for metal fatigue as a possible issue, particularly if they find out that these blades did separate the way that it currently appears that they did. And so they're going to increase the inspections on the engines. The Boeing has recommended that all Pratt & Whitney 4000 powered 777s remain on the ground until they can get at least visual inspections, and the FAA is going to require that shortly. So Japan is requiring that. So all of the engines that are out there are going to go through a very close visual inspection of all the fan blades, and they may do additional testing known as non-destructive testing using electric currents or penetrative dye to see if there's any very small cracks. Because once these cracks initially show up, what happens is it begins to propagate. It gets larger and larger, and at that moment, then that can what can lead to failure. So they're going to look very carefully. This is a very serious condition or event, and so both the manufacturer, the engine manufacturer, Pratt and Whitney, Boeing, the airplane manufacturer, and the FAA, they're taking this very seriously. NTSB is on site. They have outstanding metallurgists that will look at these blades. They'll know pretty quickly what happened here.
Well, you've seen a lot of stuff in your career. I mean, a lot of issues and incidents in the air. In closing here, just to wrap up, what would you like to say that you saw in this one that stands out in your mind and will make it memorable for you?
Well, the video, obviously, it's compelling to see that much fire. It's really unusual to see that. I think that an understanding of how this transpired will help engines manufacturers going forward. But I think I want to look at the things that went right. The crew did a lot of the right things. The design of the airplane tolerated this catastrophic failure pretty well. And the response of the ground crews, of the airport crash fire rescue people, air traffic control, a lot of things went right here. So we want to know what happened, and this rare event, as catastrophic as it was, to reduce the likelihood of it happening again. And then let's take the lessons of what went right and make sure that that is the standard by which we train pilots and ground crews in the future.
That's great, and it's wonderful to check in with you when things go right and when things end well. Folks, that's Captain John Cox. He's one of the world's foremost aviation authorities, and he's in media all over the world. He's got that column in the USA Today, and we're delighted to have him on Podcast by George. And in addition to that, I want to mention his company. He's with the Safety Operating Systems Corporation, and this is his life, aviation safety. Captain John Cox, thanks again for coming on a Podcast by George.
Good to see you, George. Thank you.
Yeah, folks, that's going to do it. That's going to wrap this particular episode up. I hope you enjoyed this. I know I do. I always like talking to Captain John Cox. My God, was this a thrilling thing. And I want to encourage people to go to podcastbygeorge.com and choose the little icon, the badge, where you'd like to get every episode and get notified so that you don't miss any of these. And you'll be informed and you'll know when we come out with a new episode. But that's going to do it for right now. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another Podcast by George.